So we discussed how chordates with a head and a skull around a brain are called craniates. Well, craniates with a vertebral column are called vertebrates. And these also evolved toward the end of the Cambrian period. And a vertebral column gave you a lot of advantages in terms of protecting your dorsal hollow nerve cord and providing a strong skeletal framework to attach your muscles to. And the oldest living lineage of vertebrates are the lampreys. And lampreys are found in a lot of places. They're found in both marine and freshwater habitats. They've been found a lot in the last 20 years in the Great Lakes in the United States. And they have cartilaginous segments, but they surround the notochord and form what is essentially a vertebral column. So quick reminder that here we are in our phylogeny. So we talked about cephalochordates and urochordates, which are invertebrates. Myxinae, which is not a true vertebrate, but it is a craniate. And then now we get to our true vertebrates. Petromezontida is a true vertebrate with a true vertebral column, and it includes the lampreys, which look like this. Right? So they don't look actually that different from the hagfish, except that they do have that vertebral column. They do not have jaws, which we'll talk about in a second. Right? But they do have some teeth in some way, shape, or form. And they sort of latch on to other fish and chew on the side of them. Now, it was early vertebrates, so ancestors of what we see today, that were the first vertebrates with mineralized teeth. And we call these conodonts, right? So dont means teeth, cono means cone, so they mean coned teeth. And there are examples of these dental fossils, essentially, in the rock record. So here's one example. Again, we see teeth here, not jaws, but teeth. And you can see where those teeth are coming out of the mouth in the front. And it seems from the fossil record like mineralization originated in vertebrate mouth parts and then got to the endoskeleton later. So you started having those calcified teeth before you had calcified bones. It was just cartilage before that. So chordates with heads and skulls around a brain are called craniates, and craniates with a backbone are called vertebrates, and vertebrates with jaws are called gnathostomes. And gnatho refers to jaws, and I always think of like biblically, like the grinding and gnashing of teeth, right? Gnatho sounds like gnashing, and teeth are in jaws. So gnathostomes have jaws, and this includes sharks and their other relatives, but also ray-finned and lobe-finned fishes, and amongst lobe-finned fishes, we have amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. So we are technically gnathostomes. We are also technically craniates and vertebrates, right? But we are gnathostomes. We have jaws. And it seems as if the bones that form the jaws evolved from the skeletal supports from the pharyngeal slits. So all chordates have at some point in their life cycle pharyngeal slits. And by the time that gnathostomes had evolved, those pharyngeal slits, with the evolution of vertebrates, had bone supports next to them. And gnathostomes, some of those bone supports moved forward and became hinged and became jaws. And here you can see those skeletal rods supporting the gill slits, and they eventually evolve into what we see today as jaws. And jaws are a big deal, right? It allows you to eat things that are much, much larger. And when you eat things that are much, much larger, you have a lot more energy to work with. And that allows you to do things like have a big brain, right? Brains are energy intensive. So it helps if you can eat large things. And these gnathostomes also had another duplication of Hox genes. So we had more of these Hox developmental genes. We also have an enlarged forebrain and enhanced senses. Again, more food eating means more brain power, and brain power is associated with enhanced senses. So smell and vision, a lateral line system, which allows you to sense vibrations in the water. And all of these things are things that you find in sharks. So the earliest gnathostomes were placoderms, and placo means armored, like polyplacophora means many armored plates, right? Placoderm means armored skin or plated skin. And these guys appeared in the Ordovician, so we're a little bit more recent now, not quite the Cambrian, but about 450 million years ago, and these are the ancestors of sharks that we see today. So there are three groups of gnathostomes that exist today. But the oldest are called chondrichthyans, and chondro means cartilage. So chondrichthyans are cartilaginous skeletons, fish with cartilaginous skeletons. And this is sharks and rays and skates. So as a reminder, this is where we are, chondrichthyes, right? So cephalochordates include our lancelets, urochordates are our sea squirts, and then we get into craniates, like our hagfish, Mixini, and then we get into our vertebrates, which include Petromezontida or lampreys, and now we are into gnathostomes, fish with jaws. And again, there are lots of fish with jaws. All of these below here are fish with jaws, right? But the oldest ones are chondrichthyes, or the cartilaginous fish, such as sharks. And chondrichthyes don't have much ossification to speak of, right? They have a vertebral column, and they have, a skeleton, but it's cartilage rather than bone. And so again, we have sharks, which are probably the most common and most famous of the chondrichthyans, and they are ancient, and they are, top predators. They're really incredible at what they do. We have stingrays, which are fairly diverse. There are a fair amount of stingrays, right? Moana's grandmother was a stingray. And then we have ratfish. And ratfish are a little bit like sharks, but there aren't very many of them, and they're a bit smaller. Sharks are what we would consider aerodynamic if they were swimming through the air, but we'll call them streamlined because they're in the water, and they are fast. And most sharks are carnivores. There are some, like the whale sharks, the largest of the sharks, that are suspension feeders, more like whales. But most are fast-swimming predators with relatively short digestive tracts and very, very acute senses to allow them to hunt. So that includes sight, good vision, smell, and by smell we mean detecting small amounts of chemicals, but in this case in the water rather than the air, right? This is why if you're looking for sharks, like in the movie Jaws, right, you toss the chum out, which is blood and little bits of fish, and from hundreds of miles away, supposedly sharks can get little bits of that blood in the water. But they also are sometimes able to detect electrical fields, or at least vibrational fields, because of those lateral line systems. And there are a lot of different kinds of sharks, and while they all have internal fertilization, they give birth in different ways. So a lot of them lay eggs. They are oviparous. Oviparous means you lay eggs. Ova means eggs. Some are viviparous, which means that embryo develops inside the uterus instead of in an egg, and is developed with a yolk sac that's kind of like a placenta from the mother's blood, and then is born like mammals. And some are ovoviviparous. So the embryo develops within the uterus, but is nourished by the egg yolk. There's nothing to do with a placenta-like structure from the mother's blood. So the oldest gnathostomes, or jawed fish, are chondrichthyes, the cartilaginous fish. But they're not the only gnathostomes. There are obviously other jawed vertebrates as well, and that includes osteichthyans, which means fish with a bony skeleton. And we are bony fish, believe it or not, because we evolved from fish. The vast majority of these are ray-finned fish, but there are also lobe-finned fish as well. So now we're talking actinopterygii, which are ray-finned fishes, and actinistia, which are lobe-finned fishes. And most fish that you would see out in the water, if you go fishing, most fish you're going to catch, are ray-finned fishes here. And fish tend to draw water over their gills with something called an operculum, which is like a lid to their gills, right? And you see them kind of doing this, right? You have a little fish face you're looking at, right? This thing is the operculum. And below that is the gills, and they draw water over it to keep fresh oxygenated water coming in. They're able to control their buoyancy, moving up and down, with an air sac called a swim bladder. Now, this is important not only as something that's beneficial to them by controlling buoyancy, but also because in later fish, like lungfish, the swim bladder is actually what evolves into lungs, which can then extract air, oxygen, I should say, from the air. They also have a lateral line system, like sharks, and most species are oviparous, which means they lay eggs. And here you can see these gills, which evolved from those pharyngeal gill slits, which you see in chordates, right? They have a dorsal nerve cord. They have a skeleton, which evolved from the notochord, and they have a postanal tail here. So these are definitely chordates. And they have a lot of the similar structures you'd see in us, right? They have a stomach and intestines, a liver, for instance, a heart. But they also have this swim bladder, which again eventually evolves in certain fish into lungs for breathing in the land rather than in the water. And you can see the pelvic fin, and they would have a pectoral fin up here, but you can't see it because it's cut off. But all of these fins have very delicate bones that sort of array out, and these are ray fins. Right? So as opposed to lobe fin fishes, these are ray fin fishes, which is, again, the most common type. So essentially, if you're asked to think of an example of a ray fin fish, just think of a fish, right? Because it's going to be a ray fin fish, with a very few exceptions, which are probably fish that you don't really know, right? The fish that you think of are going to be ray fin fish. So these are just a few random examples, right? Tuna, lionfish, which are beautiful and also toxic. They're venomous. Seahorses, moray eels, right? Eels are also ray fin fish. They all have some variation of these fins with rayed out bones, right? These are very delicate looking bones. Lobe fin fish have muscular pelvic and pectoral fins. And they also originated during the Silurian period, but there aren't nearly as many of them left. So it's not that they're necessarily a lot newer than ray fin fish. It's just that a lot more ray fin fish survived the couple of mass extinctions that they lived through. And here's sort of a generic example of a lobe fin fish. These fins, the pectoral and pelvic fins, are a little bit beefier, and the bone structure is different. And there are really only 3 lineages left that survive. The coelacanths, which for the longest time were thought to be extinct. We had fossils of coelacanths, but we didn't have any actual coelacanths until the 20s, and then again, I think in the 50s, we found another population of them. But these are lobe fin fish that are alive, look just like the fossils from hundreds of millions of years ago. Lungfishes, which are fish that live in the shallows and have lungs that again evolved from swim bladders. And then tetrapods. And tetrapods are us, right? Tetrapods are lobe fin fishes that left the water. And those pectoral and pelvic fins became limbs, right? Tetrapod means 4 legs or 4 limbs. And again, these are actually the most diverse group of lobe fin fish. But we don't think of them as fish because they, or we, tend to mostly live on land. So, if chordates that have a head with a brain surrounded by a skull are called craniates, and craniates with a vertebral column are called vertebrates, and vertebrates with jaws are called gnathostomes. And within gnathostomes, we have fish like cartilaginous fish, chondrichthyes, and bony fish, oxychthyes, and bony fish with lobe fins that happen to grow into feet are called tetrapods. So gnathostomes with limbs are tetrapods, and that includes pretty much any 4-legged animal that you see on the earth today. We are all lobe fin fish. In the next video, we will go into a lot more detail about the diversity of tetrapods.